We've gotten to see glimpses of 4 practices so far, but we got a chance to talk with Nico Iamaleava for the first time since his post-game availability after the Ohio State game at the end of last season. And, a lot of talk, obviously, about off-season work. He talked a lot about the time he spent with Mike Matthews out in California. Those guys trained together during the winter as they got ready for the second semester. And just some, as it comes up every time with a quarterback, leadership is kind of where the conversation naturally went. I feel like this was talked about a lot last year because he had been waiting behind Joe Milton for a chance to play, and then he was stepping forward as that guy, but he wasn't the elder statesman of that offense.
Yeah.
You had Brew McCoy and Cooper Mays and some guys that were clearly the leaders of that team, it felt like, even though he was the quarterback.
Yeah.
But it feels like this year, at least he's taken the approach of, and he did say last year was the time for me to do that too, but reality, he was a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
Now he's in his 3rd year in the program. He's the unquestioned starter. He is the guy that needs to not only be better than he was last year, he needs to be one of this team's best players, let's face it. So you saw what he said last week. Any thoughts on sort of what he said, and how much do we overplay the leadership angle at all at the quarterback position, or is that something that Tennessee really needs him to take charge this offseason to kind of be the guy for maybe not just the offense but the entire team?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to start out with, his comments, very similar to what he has said throughout the time. He's a hard worker, wants to pour into the team pours into him, all that stuff. But, when you look at leadership and you look at the leadership perspective, who is the true leader of the offense? Yes, it always typically falls on the quarterback. But I think it's a really important thing for teams to not force that situation. I've seen it happen before, and they force the quarterback to be the leader. And I mean, I understand the perspective. He is the captain of the offense. But sometimes some things are better left said for somebody else to say it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you saw that last year. I mean, you had Cooper Mays, Brew McCoy, Dylan Sampson. Those were the leaders of that offense, and so their voice was heard when they spoke. So, I mean, like he said, I think it was Coach Halsley that said it. I mean, there was no reason for Nico to speak up when those guys were already talking. But I know Nico. I know that he is leadership driven. I know that he is okay with taking on that weight of being the leader of an offense, because it's a lot to deal with when you're not only having to worry about your job, but when you become a leader of an entire group, you have to worry about what all 11 are doing as well, or the rest of the 10. And so it's added responsibilities and stress for him, but I think he is more than capable of handling it. But like I said, don't make it a forced situation. Just let it happen naturally, which I think it already has taken place.
Right.
I think back, Hendon Hooker is a great example of just letting those things happen naturally. And then, I mean, it got to a point where, Hendon, every time that he spoke, you listened. I mean, and that's what is developing with Nico here. But it's just important for them not to force that label onto him and just let the players gravitate towards him as the leader, because you're much better off with a team-chosen leader than you are by appointing a leader, because people will be more accepting of it and understanding of it.
Yep.
But, I mean, he's a huge force. Like you said, he's got to be our best player this year. I mean, it showed, obviously that Ohio State game was not a clean game by any means.
Yeah.
But if you look back at that film, I think you'll really see the guy that stood out for us was Nico. And we're going to continue to need a lot more of that and more production than even what that game was from him to continue to be successful. And he knows that. I mean, Ball Nation knows that. The coaches know that. And they're going to continue to develop and work on him as long as they can. But from a leadership perspective, I truly believe that he's going to be a great leader. He's going to be able to take this team into uncomfortable situations and make them comfortable.
Yep.
And that's something that that's a huge asset. And especially having a guy as talented as he is, and as well spoken as he is too. He can formulate what he wants to get across, and he's motivational.
Yep.
And I mean, that's the perfect recipe right there for a great leader.
And there was an example that came up during Joey Halsley's media session. He mentioned that there was something that had come up on the practice field that day where Nico kind of said something to the team. We asked Nico to elaborate. He's like, I'd rather not. Some things need to stay on the practice field. So we're already seeing that, to your point, kind of naturally happen, not forcing it. I would think that's a good sign. But, yeah, leadership is always one of those things we discuss with quarterbacks, and I was curious your thoughts on just sort of how – do we overblow that or not?